January 22, 1944. Anzio, Italy. The cold wind whipped across the Italian coast as the first Allied landing craft hit the beach. The sound of artillery echoed in the distance. Smoke filled the air. Soldiers ran across the sand, taking cover behind anything they could find. And on that same beach, a young woman stepped off a transport ship, carrying a medical bag and wearing a steel helmet with a red cross painted on the side. Her name was Ellen Ainsworth. She was 24 years old. She was an army nurse, and she had no idea that in less than a month, she would die saving the lives of men she had never met. Ellen was not a soldier in the traditional sense. She did not carry a rifle. She did not march into battle. But what she did was just as dangerous, just as important, and just as brave. She walked into hell, stayed there when others ran, and gave her life so that others could live. This is her story. March 9th, 1919, Glenwood City, Wisconsin. Ellen Ainsworth was born on a small family farm near Menomonee, Wisconsin. Her parents were hardworking people who believed in honest labor and strong values. Ellen was the youngest of 3 children. She grew up surrounded by open fields, quiet mornings, and the simple rhythms of farm life. But life on the farm was not easy. In 1923, when Ellen was just 4 years old, the bank foreclosed on their homestead. The family lost everything. They packed their belongings and moved to Glenwood City, a small town where Ellen's father found work to support the family. Ellen grew up watching her parents struggle. She saw how hard they worked just to put food on the table. She learned early that life was not fair, and that the only way to survive was to keep moving forward, no matter how hard things got. She was a quiet girl. She did not talk much, but she noticed things. She noticed when people were hurting. She noticed when they needed help, and she decided, even as a child, that she wanted to spend her life helping others. When Ellen finished high school, she told her parents she wanted to become a nurse. Her family did not have much money, but they supported her dream. Ellen enrolled at the Hospital School of Nursing in Minneapolis. She studied hard. She worked long hours. She learned how to care for the sick, how to comfort the dying, and how to stay calm when everything around her was falling apart. In 1941, Ellen graduated. She was now a registered nurse. She could have taken a comfortable job at a private hospital in Minneapolis. She could have stayed close to home, earned a steady paycheck, and lived a quiet, safe life. But Ellen did not want safe. She wanted to see the world. She wanted to do something bigger than herself. And when the United States entered World War II in December 1941, Ellen knew exactly what she had to do. In March 1942, Ellen Ainsworth joined the United States Army Nurse Corps. She was sent to Camp Chaffee, Arkansas for training. The Army taught her how to work in field hospitals, how to treat combat wounds, and how to function under pressure. She learned to sleep in tents, to work without electricity, and to keep moving, even when she was exhausted. After Camp Chaffee, Ellen was assigned to the 56th Evacuation Hospital at Fort Sam Houston in Texas. The 56th was a mobile medical unit designed to operate close to the front lines. It could be set up quickly, moved when necessary, and operated under the most difficult conditions imaginable. Ellen trained with the unit for months. She got to know the other nurses, the doctors, and the medics. They became her family. And in late 1942, they received their orders. They were going overseas. The 56th Evacuation Hospital was first sent to North Africa. They landed in Morocco, where they treated wounded soldiers from the campaign against German forces in Tunisia. The work was hard. The heat was brutal. But Ellen thrived. She loved the challenge. She loved feeling like she was making a difference. After North Africa, the unit was sent to Tunisia, and then to Salerno, Italy, in September 1943. The fighting in Italy was some of the fiercest of the war. The Germans were dug in across the mountains and valleys. Every mile the Allies advanced was paid for in blood. Ellen worked day and night. She treated soldiers with gunshot wounds, shrapnel injuries, burns, and infections. She held the hands of dying men and whispered words of comfort. She worked until her hands were raw and her body ached. But she never complained. She just kept going. And then, in late January 1944, Ellen and the 56th Evacuation Hospital were sent to a place that would become one of the most dangerous battlefields in World War II, Anzio. The plan seemed simple. The Allies would launch a surprise amphibious landing behind German lines at the small coastal town of Anzio, about 30 miles south of Rome. The goal was to cut off German supply lines and force them to retreat. But the plan went wrong almost immediately. The Allies landed successfully on January 22, 1944. But instead of pushing inland quickly, the commanding officers hesitated. They wanted to secure the beachhead before advancing. That delay gave the Germans time to regroup. Within days, German forces surrounded the Anzio beachhead. What was supposed to be a quick operation turned into a 4-month siege. The 56th Evacuation Hospital set up its tents near the beach. The hospital was made of canvas tents marked with large red crosses. According to international law, hospitals were not supposed to be targeted. But the Germans ignored that law. They shelled the hospital constantly. The soldiers and medical staff called the area Hell's Half Acre. It was a living nightmare. German artillery rained down day and night. Bombs exploded without warning. The ground shook constantly. The tents were torn apart by shrapnel. And through it all, the nurses kept working. Ellen Ainsworth was one of those nurses. She worked in the surgical ward, helping doctors operate on wounded soldiers. She worked 16-hour shifts, sometimes longer. She slept in her helmet. She ate when she could, and she refused to leave. At one point, the army considered evacuating the nurses. The situation was too dangerous, they said. Too many people were dying, but the nurses refused to go. They insisted on staying with their patients. They argued that the wounded men needed them, and that they would not abandon their posts. The army relented. The nurses stayed. Ellen learned what the other nurses call the Anzio shuffle. It was a low, duck-walk crouch that kept you below the line of shrapnel when shells exploded nearby. She learned to dive into slick trenches filled with cold, muddy water during air raids. She learned to keep working even when bombs fell so close that the ground shook beneath her feet. She learned to live with fear, but she never let that fear stop her. On February 10, 1944, the German bombardment intensified. Shells fell on the hospital all day. Explosions rocked the tents. Dust and smoke filled the air. Patients screamed. Nurses ran from tent to tent, trying to move the wounded to safety. Ellen was on duty in one of the surgical wards. She had 42 patients under her care, most of them too injured to move. When the shelling started, other nurses rushed patients into nearby bunkers, but Ellen stayed. She knew that the men in her ward could not be moved. If she left, they would die. So she stayed. She moved through the ward, checking on each patient. She spoke calmly, reassuring them that everything would be okay. She adjusted bandages, checked IVs, and made sure they were as safe as possible. And all the while, shells exploded around her. Then, on February 12th, a German artillery round landed just outside the tent. The explosion was deafening. Shrapnel tore through the canvas walls. Ellen was hit. A piece of metal pierced her chest near her lungs. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. She staggered, but she did not fall. She did not scream. She looked down at the wound, then looked back at her patients, and she kept working. Witnesses later said that Ellen calmly directed the placing of all 42 patients on the ground to protect them from further injury. She moved methodically, one patient at a time, making sure each one was as safe as possible. She spoke softly, reassuring them even as blood soaked through her uniform. Only when every patient was secure did Ellen finally allow herself to be helped. She was rushed to another part of the hospital for treatment. The doctors did what they could, but the wound was too severe. The shrapnel had torn through her lung. She was slowly suffocating from internal injuries. For 4 days, Ellen fought to stay alive. She remained conscious for much of that time. She asked about her patients. She asked if they were okay. Even as she lay dying, her thoughts were not on herself. They were on the men she had saved. On February 16th, 1944, Ellen Ainsworth died. She was 24 years old. The news of Ellen's death spread quickly through the hospital. The other nurses wept. The doctors bowed their heads. The soldiers she had saved held moments of silence. And back home in Wisconsin, Ellen's parents received a telegram on what would have been her 25th birthday, telling them that their daughter was gone. Ellen Ainsworth was one of 6 Army nurses killed at Anzio. She was the only woman from Wisconsin to die from enemy fire during World War II. For her actions on February 10th, Ellen was awarded the Silver Star, the 3rd highest military decoration for valor. She was also awarded the Purple Heart. Her citation read, "By her disregard for her own safety and her calm assurance, she instilled confidence in her assistants and her patients, thereby preventing serious panic and injury. Her courage under fire and her selfless devotion to duty were an inspiration to all who witnessed her actions." The 56 Evacuation Hospital remained at Anzio until May 1944, but Allied forces finally broke the siege. During those 4 months, the hospital treated more than 33,000 patients, including nearly 11,000 battle casualties. Dozens of medical personnel were killed or wounded, but the work never stopped. The nurses of Anzio came to be known as the Angels of Anzio. They were celebrated for their bravery, their dedication, and their refusal to abandon the men they had sworn to care for. But for many years after the war, their stories were forgotten. The world remembered the soldiers who stormed the beaches and fought in the trenches, but few remembered the women who worked in the tents behind the lines, who saved lives under fire, and who died doing their duty. Ellen Ainsworth was buried at the Sicily-Rome American Cemetery in Italy. Her grave is marked with a simple white cross, but her legacy is far greater than that stone marker. In the years since her death, Ellen has been honored in many ways. A conference room at the Pentagon is named in her honor. A dispensary at Fort Hamilton bears her name. A post office in Glenwood City, Wisconsin was designated a memorial post office by Congress. But perhaps the greatest honor is the memory carried by the men she saved. 42 soldiers walked away from that hospital tent on February 10, 1944, because Ellen Ainsworth chose to stay. 42 men went home to their families, lived their lives, had children, grew old. All because a quiet girl from Wisconsin refused to run. Ellen Ainsworth's story is one of courage, sacrifice, and selflessness. She did not seek glory. She did not want recognition. She simply wanted to help. And when the moment came, when everything was falling apart and death was all around her, she did not think about herself. She thought about the men in her care. She stayed when others ran. She worked when others would have frozen in fear. And she gave her life so that others could live. That is what a hero looks like. Today, when we think of World War II, we think of the soldiers who stormed the beaches, the pilots who flew the bombers, and the generals who led the armies. But we must also remember the nurses, the women who worked in the tents, who held the hands of dying men, and who faced danger with the same courage as any soldier. Ellen Ainsworth was one of those women. She was shot at. She was bombed. And she still kept operating on soldiers at Anzio. She dared the battlefield. She dared death itself. And she proved that bravery has no gender. Her name was Ellen Ainsworth. She was 24 years old. She was a nurse, and she was a hero.